Hi, this is Stephen Wilson, and you're watching The Rock Office. Enjoy.
Hey everyone out there, you've reached the Rock Office. It's time to clock in and rock out. I'm your host, Bill Smith.
And I'm Kevin Davis.
We are excited to bring you this episode. We have an exclusive backstage interview with Mr. Stephen Wilson. Many of you might know him as the leader of Porcupine Tree. We got a chance to go backstage in the Cleveland House of Blues before his show in May and had a chance to sit down and have some really good conversation with him. Really changed our opinion of him and his music, and just such a great guy to talk to. So we are really pleased and excited to bring you this interview. Kevin.
Yeah, I think if you're a musician and you can really appreciate, especially the artists that are able to go into the studio and do a lot on their own and then bring a band in later to kind of build what they've already kind of put together, I think you'll really appreciate it. And he has some really deep thoughts on some of the questions that we asked in regards to some of the normal questions that we like to, kind of get a feeling for artists. Their thought pattern in regards to like physical music and things like that, and he was really top notch guy. I honestly I knew of him prior to the interview, but after meeting him and going through that interview, I think it was pretty sweet.
He was incredible to talk to, super nice guy, just probably to date one of our best interviews.
Yeah, I
hands
agree.
Down.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
Well, why don't we get right into the interview?
Yeah, so fluffing it up. Let's show them what we got.
Here you go.
All right.
All right, everybody. We are backstage at the Cleveland House of Blues with Mr. Stephen Wilson. Stephen, thank you for being on the show with us today.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
I want to tell you what a incredible work your new album is, The Raven That Refused to Sing and Other Stories. I know it's a concept piece. Can you maybe share a little bit about what inspired you to write it and a little bit of the process of the writing and recording of it?
Sure. Well, the idea is that the album is like a book of supernatural short stories, by which I mean that each of the songs on the record is based on a self-contained gothic ghost story, if you like, but very much in a kind of old-fashioned way. I'm very inspired by the sort of gothic fiction from the late 19th century, early 20th century. Those kind of writers. Most famously in America, you would have had Edgar Allan Poe. In Britain, we had people like Arthur Machen, Algernon Blackwood, M.R. James, who wrote these very kind of brooding supernatural tales with this feeling of dread that kind of goes through them. They're almost like dark fairy tales. They're very different to the kind of modern sort of ideas we have about horror or supernatural fiction. And I love them. They're sort of classical tradition. So the album, each of the songs is based on, and in fact some of them do exist as short stories as well as songs.
Oh, that's awesome. So how does this album, in comparison to some of your previous solo efforts, how does that stand up to it? Or, what kind of comparison or contradiction can you draw to those?
Well, in terms of the subject matter, or just in general?
In general.
Well, I think the main thing with this album is it's the first album I've made with a band, which may seem like a contradiction. It's a solo record, but it's with a band. But of course, part of being a solo artist is also being a band leader, and this time around, I wanted to have more of the feeling of a live performance, the kind of electricity and chemistry you get when you have musicians actually interacting together in a room. So for the last album, Grace for Drowning, I made the record, then I put together a band to go and tour that record. And that was a real thrill and a real kind of successful sort of experiment.
Okay.
And so I wanted to take that band and take them into the studio almost immediately. So I wrote this material very much with those guys in mind. So that's a big change, to have been making a record kind of in the abstract without necessarily having a specific idea about who would be playing on it, to actually writing for a specific set of musical personalities. Okay. I think that's the main thing here.
That's interesting. One of the things I wanted to ask you about, the second I found out that you had the opportunity to work with him, Alan Parsons, obviously a legend. How did that experience, how did that work for you? And how did you, obviously I would assume he's somewhat of an influence on you and your music. How was that working with him, and what kind of contributions did he bring to this effort?
Well, Alan was hired to be the engineer. I mean, just going back to what I was saying about earlier, as soon as I kind of made this decision that I'm going to make a record with a live band, and I also, as part of that, I wanted to extend that to the actual recording process in the sense that I wanted to capture the band performing live. Now, that's very different to the way I've made other records. And to be fair, the way most people make records these days is in a more kind of modular way. You get the drummer in for a week, you work on the backing tracks, then you send the drummer away, you get the bass player in, you work on... And it's that very kind of fragmented, controlled way. And I didn't want to do that this time. I wanted the band to basically be playing together in the studio and capture that kind of live... Well, as I say, that live chemistry.
Yes.
Now, what that meant for me, practically speaking, is that for the first time in my career, I couldn't really be the control freak that I'm used to and control every aspect. So I wanted to be the musical director, and I wanted to be the producer, and I wanted to be in the room with the musicians, kind of directing proceedings, if you like. So the first thing I thought was, okay, I'm going to need a great engineer. And then I thought, well, you know what? I really love the sound of 70s records. I think the records in the 70s just sound the best. And so I had a list of great engineers from the 70s, and Alan was top of my list, because this is the guy that worked on Abbey Road. He worked on Dark Side of the Moon. He worked with Al Stewart. He made his own series of classic records with his project. And the one thing they all have in common is they all sound beautiful, gorgeous sounding records. So he was top of my list, and luckily when I called him up, he was already familiar with my work, and so it was very easy from then on just to have him come on board and do it. And it was great. I mean, I would say he did a fantastic job, but people ask me what I learned from it, and I say nothing, because I literally was not overseeing what he was doing. If you imagine the studio as one room with the musicians, and then on the other side of the glass you have the guy that's engineering and recording it. Well, Alan was in that room and I was in the other room. So I didn't necessarily see a lot of what he did, but every time I came into the room to listen, it sounded great.
Yeah.
So that's great.
Well, we were listening to the album on our way up here, and there are so many things a lot of influences, not to knock you or anything, but a lot of the 70s you're talking about, like some of the Moody Blues, the Floyd, definitely Rush, and you talking about being a live album, if you will, definitely comes over in the musicianship. And so hats off to you on achieving that. I think you really did. We have a lot of techie, geeky music, kind of nerdy people that watch our show. What kind of gear did you use on this album? Did you record analog or digital? What kind of things can you share with us that you use as far as instrumentation, any other kind of gear, recording or otherwise that you used in this album?
Okay. I'm a big fan of analog, except for one part of the process, which is the actual mixing, the data capturing. I love to work with within the computer with plugins, because I like to develop my mixes over a period of weeks. I like to be able to work on a mix, save it away, come back to it the next day, and just carry on. So I love working on the mixing side within the box. And so the album was mixed pretty much completely inside the computer. I used Universal Audio plugins. I don't know if you know their stuff.
A little familiar with them.
They're fantastic. They do a lot of emulations of classic analog gear.
Oh, okay.
So I'm using emulations of things like the EMT 140 plate reverb. I'm using emulations of classic compressors, the 1176.
Okay.
But they're emulations.
Okay.
And it's all in the box. Up until that point, everything is pretty much analog. I mean, the keyboards on the album, for example, are all what you might call classic analog tones. Fender Rhodes, piano, Moog synthesizer, Hammond organ, Hammond B3 through a Leslie cabinet, and for some of the more orchestral textures, the Mellotron. A lot of people think of the Mellotron as like a sampler, and it is a sampler, but it also has a very organic, scratchy quality that for me almost puts it in the same bracket as a Steinway piano or a Hammond B3 or a beautiful Fender Rhodes. It's got that kind of vintage sound.
Wake is our tech guy over here, our music producer guy, and we were listening. He's like, "Is that a Mellotron?" I'm like, "It is."
Yeah.
And he picked that up right away.
Yeah, I love the Mellotron. I love the sort of. It has a golden organic sound to it, which for me it doesn't make it sound, modern. It's almost like outside of time. And so that keyboard-wise, we used a lot of those kind of keyboard textures. Very little of what you would call synthesized sounds on the record. Again, with the guitars. Just before we go on to the guitars, the drums. No reverb on the drums.
Okay.
No reverb. Just a couple of places where I use reverb for a kind of a kind of featured thing. But generally speaking, the drums are completely dry.
Wow.
And we also made a decision to record the drums on only 7 channels. Now, one thing a lot of people do these days is they spread the drums over like 25 channels. You got mic on below on top of the snare, below the snare, the toms. We got the sound we liked. This is part of what also comes from working with Alan. I mean, that's what those guys did. You know? They were working on 16-track tapes, 24-track tapes.
Right.
They couldn't spread the drums out over 20. So they kind of got a great sound, and then very often they would just sum it down to 3 or 4 channels. We were a little bit more, flexible. We had about 6 or 7 channels. Drums, pretty much completely dry. Guitars and bass, pretty much as they went through the amps. Guthrie was using a Sur amp, and I was using an AC30 and a Marshall, and just foot pedals, stomp boxes and things to just give a bit more color to the sound.
Wow, that's remarkable, especially with the drum sound, because Kevin's a drummer, and that's one of the things he commented about, how amazing it sounded. So that's just to know that they're natural is
completely
impressive.
natural.
Yeah,
well, the thing is, if you listen to 70s records, putting a lot of reverb on drums is a very kind of 80s onwards
exactly,
thing. It's a very 80s onwards thing. And then you had the guys like in the 90s and the sort of last part of last decade, the producers making records for all these big American hard rock bands, and it was all about the massive room sound, massive compression on the room and really in your face. I got really tired of that sound, and I wanted to go back to the sound these guys had in the early 70s, which was almost a dead sound.
Yes.
You listen to drummers like Bill Bruford and Nick Mason on the Floyd records, completely dead and completely dry. No added reverb, none of that roominess that you get. And it's amazing how much space that frees up for the other instruments to breathe.
Well, it sounds like with Alan Parsons, you got the perfect person to help you, achieve that. And once again, you have, and that's one of the things that we picked up on when we were listening to the album. So,
well, it's funny. I had to have that fight with Alan because Alan was like, "Don't you want reverb on the drums?" I said, "No, I want the kind of sounds you were getting in the '70s." And I had to push him in a way to go back in time. But once I did that, he totally got back into that groove.
Awesome. Yeah. That's great. So, all right, guys, we are here with Steven Wilson. Here is a little sound, a little sample of what he does. I hope you enjoy it. We'll be right back.
I'm afraid to wait. I'm afraid to love. Just because I'm weak, you can steal my dreams. You can reach inside my head. You can put your son there instead. Please come to me. Please stay with me. Please.
everybody. We are backstage at the Cleveland House of Blues with Steven Wilson. He's on tour right now supporting his new solo album. And Steven, many of our viewers in the States will know you as the leader and founder of Porcupine Tree. Would you care to elaborate a little bit what the status of Porcupine Tree is? And you guys have anything, you know, in works here in the near future?
The simple answer to that question is no. Okay, here's the thing with Porcupine Tree. It's obviously a big part of my life and a big part of my history. It's the thing that became the most successful, and therefore people most identify with me. But I didn't plan it that way. You know, Porcupine Tree was just one of several projects I started in the early 90s. No Man, then later on bands like Blackfield and but Porcupine Tree, for whatever reason, and of course I'm very happy about this, for whatever reason, kind of was the one that took off and allowed me and the band to tour the world and to generate interest internationally and to build a fan base. And of course, I understand that a lot of my fans now have come through that route, listening to that music. Right. Porcupine Tree was itself a solo project. The first 3 albums are solo. There's no one else on those records except me. It became a band later on. And of course, as time went on, it achieved more of a band identity, even though, you know, I still wrote most of the music. So Porcupine Tree now is very much defined by the 4 guys when we play together. Right. We made a lot of records together during 15 years and we toured a lot together, but it was never something that I saw myself doing forever. Okay. But I'm not saying that we've broken up, because we haven't. Okay. Basically, I would say we are on a kind of hiatus. Okay. We got to a point where we felt we'd achieved all we could with the current sort of approach we were taking. And we wanted to go away and do some other things. And for me, I guess in a way, I'd always been waiting for that day when I would actually be able to launch the project, which I feel I've always been meant to launch, which is, of course, the solo project. A project that I could bring all of the various strands of my musical interest together, finally in one thing, and actually be able to go out and present the kind of show I'd always imagined. You know, one of the things about being in a band, and it's a great thing, it's a negative and a positive, is that you are a democracy, so you compromise. Right. You don't, as an individual, you don't get to do everything you want to do, but the good thing about that is that because of that melting pot, you get this really strong core identity where the 4 of you meet. Yeah. But that can also be, of course, slightly frustrating. If you not just for me, I'm talking about the other 3 guys too. They all have other things they want to do, and they can't bring all of them to Porcupine Tree. And I think that's why, in a sense, for me, the solo work now is definitive for me, because it's finally me saying, this is completely my personality, without any consideration for what the fans expect, for what the band expect, for what the record company expect, and those things are all you know, all come into play. You know.
Yeah. Well, it's important as an artist too to be able to express yourself without being limited by things. So
I think absolutely, and I think also one thing that's very interesting to me is that it seems to be accepted that if in the music world, if you have a successful brand, you're expected to just keep on doing it. And actually, in any other line of any other sort of line of work, if I said to anyone, you're going to be doing the same job with the same people your whole life, they'd be horrified. Yeah, right. Most people would be horrified, you know? Right. You're going to work in the same office with the same people and do the same job every day of your life until you're 70. Yeah. They'd be horrified. But it's almost accepted that if you're in the music industry and you have a successful brand, you don't stop. Well, I don't subscribe to that. Yeah. I think part of being an interesting creative person is to continue to evolve, work with different people, explore different musical possibilities. And I guess that's what I'm doing.
Well, that actually segues nicely into my next question for you, which is, you have such an extensive body of work. I mean, not just your solo material, but, you know, the work with Porcupine Tree and the other side projects. When you're on a tour like this, how do you distinguish between, you know, your recent album and, you know, what it was in your heart to express now, versus having such a wide body of work that, you know, some of your fans would like to hear or you know, play as well? How do you distinguish between, you know, what you're going to perform for the fans, what you're not going to? I mean, what is your thought process in that?
My thought process is this, that I think if you consider yourself to be an artist, it sounds very pretentious to say it, but I can't think of any other words to say it really. If you consider yourself to be an artist, then you have to be selfish. What I mean by that is that if you start thinking about, you see, the way you phrase the question is your fans expect this, your fans expect that.
Right.
I don't think an artist ever considers what they. It sounds very selfish, very pretentious, but I think it's true. I don't think Picasso ever painted pictures to please other people. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
and I'm not comparing myself to a great artist like Picasso, but the principle is the same. That I think part of what being an artist is being actually quite bloody minded and quite selfish. And the moment you start thinking about the other people, the fans or the agents or the manager or the record, you've become an entertainer.
Yeah, and unfortunately, you hear a lot of entertainers. One that comes to my mind right now is Lauryn Hill, who's publicly noted that she's fallen victim to that kind of.
It's very easy.
It's like being jailed almost.
It's very easy to do, to become almost a prisoner of the expectations of your fan base. It happens. It happens probably more often than not. Yeah. It's much harder to kind of retain that kind of selfishness about what you do, because there are so many other things. There are financial pressures. There's peer pressure. There's pressure if you're in a band. You have pressure from the other guys. Don't mess with the formula, as Mike Love once said to Brian Wilson when he was doing Pet Sounds. Right. And if Brian hadn't, well, he didn't quite use the word mess, but anyway, he said don't mess with the formula. And he would have been quite happy for Brian to keep on turning out songs about cars and surfing. Yeah. We would never have had Pet Sounds and Smile. And I think it's part of an art. You need artists like Brian Wilson to say, I don't care what people expect and what people want.
An artist that comes to my mind as you're saying that, I know you've covered some of his materials, Prince.
Absolutely. Yeah. Great example. Frank Zappa. I mean, there's some great examples. Right. Frank Zappa, Neil Young. These are guys that you can't honestly imagine ever sitting down and saying, what do my fans want? Let's give it to them. Yeah. You just can't imagine them ever. That just thought process just would never enter their sphere of imagination. And I think I'm kind of that person. I can't think. So it's a very long-winded way of answering your question, which is saying that when I'm putting the set together, I'm basically putting together the songs I want to play, and I think the band will enjoy playing, and that's about as far as I go.
Oh, great. I'm going to digress for a little bit, if you don't mind.
Please do.
My assumption is that you're a big fan of Rush.
Right? Absolutely, yes. Okay. Yeah.
What's your thoughts on them finally getting into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame this year? And we are in Cleveland, which is kind of like a hub for the Rush maniacs.
The Rock and Roll Museum you have here, don't you? I mean, it's absurd that it's taken so long. Of course it is. It's absolutely absurd. But it's also interesting because it tells us something about this whole genre of music and this whole, whatever you call it, art rock, progressive rock, but people have many different names for it. I suppose most people would call it progressive rock these days. It speaks volumes that a band that have sold so many tickets and so many records, but playing that particular kind of music have been almost one of the last to be recognized. Yeah. When so many, I would say, bands that have achieved much less but have come from different musical traditions have found it much easier. And actually this doesn't only apply to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. This applies generally. This applies to the media. Rush, were on the cover of Rolling Stone for the first time in their career, a couple of years ago, and again, you think that's absurd.
Right.
It's absurd when, artists probably like Weezer have been on the front cover of Rolling Stone 5 times already, How absurd is that? Not that I've got anything against Weezer, but that's to do with the fact that Rush play a kind of music which was traditionally considered to be not something that the mainstream media were interested in writing about or televising or broadcasting. Right. That is changing slowly, and I think the fact they've now been inducted is a sign of that.
Well, I think even the success that you've had, and even like going back to Porcupine Tree, this is, in my opinion, you guys are the modern day flag bearer of progressive rock, and you especially. I think you've had some help in kicking those doors open, and not taking anything from Rush.
No, absolutely not. No, Rush. I think there's been a bunch of bands that have really helped to change people's idea. Radiohead. I always point to Radiohead as being one of the first bands that made sort of arty, lofty, ambitious rock music once again acceptable by the mainstream. I wouldn't call it progressive what they do, but it was certainly very ambitious and arguably quite pretentious. And listen, I use pretentious in the best possible sense of the word, because I think if more bands were pretentious, the music business would be a more interesting place. Yeah. Pretentiousness for me is about ambition. It's about reaching for something. And sometimes you fail when you reach high, but that's part of the process. So I think that, post Radiohead, post OK Computer, things began to change. The ice began to melt, and now we have bands like Muse. We have bands like Flaming Lips, all kind of paying lip service to the great 70s ambitious rock bands. And I've benefited from that, certainly, but I have to say it's really hard work. You have to work so hard to still, because this kind of music is not going to get on radio. It's not going to get on MTV. Not that any music gets on MTV, but you know what I mean. I mean music TV in the broader sense. We're never going to be a part of mainstream, so we have to work really hard.
Well, in that, once again, kind of segues into my next question. One thing we always ask our guests is, we respect and love the physical form of music, the LPs, the CDs, and one question we always ask our guests: where do you sit on the sideline or those lines as far as physical music versus digital music? I abhorred digital music. I appreciate conveniences of it, but I'll take a CD, I'll take an LP, hands down, any day over any kind of digital format. And I think, even in respects to what you're talking about, the music industry, like musicians such as yourself and those other bands you mentioned, versus kind of the fluff that is more mainstream. I think iTunes and services such as that have kind of perpetuated that. What is your opinion on physical versus digital music, and what do you think that means for the digital or the music industry from now moving forward, even?
Well, it's $1 million question, isn't it? Quite literally.
Absolutely.
I mean, my own opinion, I can't stand the idea of music reduced to ones and zeros, although you could argue a CD is ones and zeros too, but you know what I mean. The idea of music reduced to something which has no physical form. For me, it's like if you said to somebody, if you said to an art lover, somebody who loves paintings, we're going to close all the galleries down, we're just going to scan all the paintings now, and we're going to have little JPEGs that you can download onto your phone. Okay. People will be horrified.
That's a fantastic example.
But that's exactly what's happening with music. Right. The whole sort of tactile experience of having a record sleeve in your hands, reading the lyrics, putting the vinyl. I love vinyl. Putting the vinyl on the turntable. For me, it's simply a question: do you consider music to be art? If you do, then it should be presented as art, not as a piece of software. And CD was kind of a difficult thing, because CD was kind of neither one thing or the other. It was kind of neither software or art. It was somewhere between. Vinyl was clearly a kind of way of presenting music as art. Downloading is just reducing music to software. It's reducing music to what the MP3 player manufacturers call content.
Yes.
What an ugly word.
Yeah.
What an ugly concept for art to be content for MP3 players. Right. So I can't stand it. But what I really like is the fact that a lot of kids now are bringing me vinyl. That to me is a good sign.
Yes.
That young kids who don't have the kind of romantic, nostalgic attachment to vinyl like an old git like I do,
right,
are getting into vinyl. Isn't that fantastic?
I totally agree. Well, we just celebrated Record Store Day last week, and the record store we were at, which is the one you were at earlier today, we couldn't get in.
The record den.
Yeah, we could not get in it.
Right.
And to me, that just warms my heart.
It's a great sign. It's a great sign.
Yeah. Thank you for that. That was awesome. Last question: what's on the horizon for you? What's coming up in the next 6 months, years? What can people hope to see or hear from you coming up?
It's a good question. I haven't really thought too much beyond this year. I'm touring this album. I'm touring pretty much to the end of the year, because we've got shows going up to December the 1st already, with a break over the summer for festivals. I don't have any great master plan right now, and I have to say that's unusual for me. Usually, if you'd asked me that question, I would say, yes, I'm going to do this next with this band or this artist. I actually don't know. And I like that. There are so many possibilities. I don't have any master plan right now.
Awesome. Well, are there any websites, Facebook, Twitter, anything you'd like to share with our fans?
All of those. All of those.
Just Stephen Wilson?
They can search me out, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a Facebook page, there's an official page, and a SoundCloud and all that stuff.
Okay.
I'm slightly technologically, paranoid, so I leave it all to someone that knows what they're doing, yeah. But,
okay, great. Well, Stephen, thank you for taking your time out of your busy schedule. We appreciate you, appreciate the music you're bringing us, and hopefully we'll be able to meet up with you down the road.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Awesome.
Thanks
Thank
for speaking to me. Cheers.
All right, guys. All right, that was our interview with Mr. Stephen Wilson, and many of you know him from Porcupine Tree, as well as the many other artists and bands he's had the opportunity to work with and produce, and just a great guy. Hope you enjoyed the interview. Go and check out his music if you like a little bit of what you saw and heard. Super talented musician. As always, we'd like to thank the people behind the scenes working with us, everyone at BWR, his management company, Kim, his road manager, Harv.
Yeah, make sure you don't call him sir.
Yeah.
Sorry, Harv. Yeah.
Harv. But we just also like to thank the Cleveland House of Blues for letting us run around backstage and film and kind of disrupting their normal everyday routine. So thank you, Cleveland House of Blues.
Yeah, it was a great experience. Make sure you check out their website and some of the shows that they're putting on down there. Great venues to go check out some local music. They bring in a lot of national acts. I mean, like Steven Wilson as an example, and you get to get that up close experience that you can't get in a larger venue. So check it out. Really good stuff.
Yeah. And as always, we want to thank you guys for following us on our different various media outlets, such as Facebook at facebook.com/rockoffice. We're also on Twitter at _rock_office. We're also now on Instagram. You can get some behind-the-scene pictures, such as Paul's doing right now that you can't see. We always post that kind of fun stuff up at instagram.com/therrockoffice. Kevin?
Yeah, make sure you check out, we're working on a brand new website as well. It's going to be at www.therrockoffice.com. Of course, you can go there now, but it's going to redirect you over to our Facebook. But once we get that website up, which we've been working behind the scenes to do, once we get that up, I think you're going to really like it. A lot of fresh content on there. You're always going to be able to check out our episodes and check out even our written blogs in regards to some of our reviews that we do and some of the top 10 lists that we've been known to put out. And I really think you'll like it.
Yeah, great. All right. Well, as always, we want to thank you guys. If you have any questions, comments, hit us up on our different places. We gave you all those addresses. Remember, support your local independent record stores by buying the physical copy of music instead of the digital download. And we will see you next time on The Rock Office. Take care and God bless.